All right, we're here with ZM Wise, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Why are you a poet?
Certainly. Why am I a poet? Well, I didn't figure that part out until probably late high school. I've been writing since my first steps as a child, and I found myself writing in different forms, especially in poetry. Starting at the age of 6, except I didn't know what poetry was. They just taught us about it in school, and I didn't really absorb it really too much until the later years. You know, of course I read Jack Perlutsky, Ogden Nash, Shel Silverstein, the classic children's poets, and then growing up, started to get into Shakespeare and well, especially his sonnets. His poetry I prefer over his plays, believe it or not. But I digress completely. I'm a poet because that's my destiny. That's my true calling. Although I'm not relying on it for a living, because poets in general haven't made a decent living, unless you're John Ashbery. Since ever, but it's my first love. It's my, I guess the word passion would be an understatement in this case. That's how I feel about poetry. That's why I'm a poet. And I'm also a poet to spread the word that poetry is not dead. And my motto in life is that poetry lives. It lives within us all, whether you're a poet or not. So my motto consists of those two simple but hopefully powerful words. Poetry lives. Do not forget this.
Take us through your process as a poet. How do you formulate your poetry? How do you put it together?
My writing process, glad you asked. Before I started using the voice recorder, I would write down snippets of ideas on paper. But then I realized that you're not always going to have pen and paper wherever you go, unless, of course, you're me. But even so, like, for example, if I'm driving, or if I'm walking to class or to my job, I would turn on the voice recorder, put it to my mouth, and say the words poem idea. And then I would either say the title of the piece or words that belong in the poem, or sometimes even both. And whether it's a mental draft of half of the piece or the whole piece in general. And then I would write it down on paper, but not exactly in the way that it's on the voice recorder. I would, of course, spice it up a bit. I would add more words. Sometimes I would take some out. As you can see on my reading, the excerpt from my epic poem, Wolf, came from a 30-minute recording while I was walking outside at night. I turned on the voice recorder, I said, poem idea, Wolf. And it was a 30-minute recording, and this epic poem was split up into about 18 parts of poems and songs, but there was a story behind it. And of course, after listening to it bit by bit, I added words. I took some out because some didn't sound right. There were a lot of gaps because there was heavy breathing due to all the cardio, and that's how that happened. And then, so like I said, after I put the voice recorder piece on paper, that's my rough draft. I mean, you might as well look at what's on the voice recorder as an outline, and then on paper is a rough draft. And then after I'm finished writing all the pieces within the current book, I type them up to make the final drafts. And sometimes I re-edit them over the years. Then usually that's when I read them out loud. Sometimes I read drafts, depending on how confident I feel about it, which is usually, there's a certain balance between confidence and cockiness, and I'm still trying to build up my confidence rather than, narrow it down, so.
Do you have any influences?
Too many to list, sir. We would probably be here until we're both dead.
Okay. Any mentors, teachers?
A few of them, actually. Dr. John Gorman, who works here and who will be retiring, he's what I consider a silent mentor, because he never taught me any methods personally, but after hearing him read, after hearing his love of language and poetry, some of my work began to take on a certain character, and I thank him for that. Definitely Mary Margaret Carlyle. I went to one of her workshops, and I've seen her read. She's another silent mentor. But there are some who I ask for advice, and one of them is Dustin Pickering, who's been writing a lot longer than I have. And perhaps one of my greatest influences and mentors is my grandfather, Fred Weiss, who that's actually who I dedicated my first book of poetry to. He taught me pretty much all there is to know about writing and poetry, and then some. You know, a lot of what I write, in a way, is kind of like Dustin. We're kind of like Pete Townsend's of poetry. It's really self-taught, but formal education never hurts. You need to include some of that, I think, and. But most of the time it is self-taught. I've just gotten little morsels of advice, and I apply those to my work, and it helps out a lot, in taking creative writing classes, But I don't put all of my formal education into my work. There are some MFAs out there, and a lot of them, that's how they learn best, But for me, I think it's a tiny bit of a tiny fusion. You cannot have knowledge without experience, and vice versa, whatever the case might be, even if it's not poetry.
Can you talk a little bit about your first book, Take Me Back to Kingswood Clock?
Yes, Take Me Back Kingswood Clock. The title is derived from a street I used to live in Wheeling, Illinois. It's a suburban town that's not too far from the city of Chicago. And
can you talk a little bit about your book, Take Me Back to Kingswood Clock?
Certainly. Take Me Back Kingswood Clock, my first book. The title is derived from a street I used to live on in Wheeling, Illinois. It's a small suburban town near the city of Chicago, and I've always considered myself a northerner, always have a northern heart. It's where I truly belong, although I've made many allies in my move to Houston, Texas. But Take Me Back Kingswood Clock, it's also, I suppose, reminiscent of childhood, and in that book and in my first few early books, it's pretty much me testing out the waters as far as writing style, subject matter, and whatnot. Because in my high school and early college period, I went through a Hallmark love poet stage, and I guess I just had to get that out of my system, and I still have saved quite a few of those. So what what you'll see in Take Me Back Kingswood Clock, it's like I said, just testing out the waters. In each of my books that I've written, and I've written almost 30 now. Unless the book has an actual theme, the collection is usually diverse in subject matter, writing style, but I do try to include a large piece. For example, the current book I'm working on right now, The Green Eight, I've already written the title piece, and it's quite long, and that one, I suppose, can be seen as semi-autobiographical. Yeah, and if not, it can be used in a wide range of other topics. My work is pretty much symbolism galore. I try to stray away from the direct approach to the poem, unless that's what its intention is. But yeah, Take Me Back Kingswood Clock. You're going to be jumping from one page to another. It's all about, it's just quite diverse,
Tell us a little bit about other collections that you've done. Have you been in any kind of poetry journals, any other publications?
Yes. One of the very first poems that I submitted, it was accepted into this anthology called Great Poems of the Western World, and then there was another one that was accepted into another anthology called Great Poems by Young Americans, I believe was the title. And then I wanted to start submitting to actual magazines, journals, and the very first piece that I submitted to a certain magazine, believe it or not, was accepted. And in this sort of business, you have to expect a no. I'm not trying to be pessimistic, it's just, in a way, it's sort of like sales. In a way, you're metaphorically selling yourself, you're selling your work, and but not in really the business sense. You're exposing your soul to these people, and whether they allow your soul to pass through the gate and onto the page, that's up to them. The first piece, it was more of like a romantic gesture towards a momentum, towards an object, and it was called The Picture Frame, and it was accepted into this magazine in the UK, and it was called the Youth Erotic Press, and it was known for erotic poetry and erotic literature and pictures and whatnot, and quite interesting. And they actually wanted me to do a special performance for them, which you can see on my YouTube page. I held up a sign with their logo, and then I read the piece for them. It was quite an honor. And then I have been accepted into many journals throughout the country, and then there was that one in the UK, and then there was one in India where 3 poems were accepted, early drafts, mind you. And like I said, you have to expect a no and surprise yourself with a yes, and you also have to know that there's a difference between constructive criticism and harsh criticism, and I've received both. Granted, these editors have a lot of poetry coming in, and everybody would love to be accepted, but the truth of the matter is that's not always going to happen. You have to. It's a pick and choose process, and there are many factors to that, depending on the editor, depending on the magazine or journal, depending on what their theme is, depending on what the guidelines are. You have to read those submission guidelines, otherwise that attempt will be for naught. I always make sure to read the guidelines, because if you're submitting your work, you write this beautiful cover letter, and all of a sudden, 100 words too long. Big mistake, So definitely make sure to do that.
Do you have any future publishing plans? Any books that you're going to be publishing in the future?
Oh yes, sir. I plan to publish all of these books one at a time. Hopefully, 2 or 3 books a year. My next one that is coming out in, I'd like to say, 2 to 3 months, is called The Wandering Poet, and that will be published by Transcendent Zero Press, as I'm working with Mavlit, who is also publisher to Victor Johnson, also known as Birdman. And he was the one who published Take Me Back, Kingswood Clock, and I'll be publishing probably my 3rd book with him next year, quite a few months after The Wandering Poet has gained some attention.
Can you tell us a little bit about your publishing experience? How has it been for you?
Well, thanks to Dustin Pickering, I can now speak about this subject. He took me under his wing as assistant editor of Harbinger Asylum back in April to May 2012, and I've known him for a bit longer. He could recognize my passion in poetry and what I was about, and he noticed that I share the same passion as him. We share that same mental writing on the pen aura, and it was quite grand, and I was doing mental cartwheels in my head. And he, little by little, he's given me some tutorials on the actual publishing process, like what is it like, and I now have professional editing experience as well as writing. And I love it when he asks me to give him my opinion on certain matters, and I'd like to say I've been a pretty decent decision maker. He sends me the new manuscripts that we publish, and he asks me like if I think it's worth it or not. Usually, most of the time, I do trust his judgment. It's not really clouded, but there are times where you're not going to agree with one another, where you're going to say, well, I think maybe the press should lean towards this direction. But in the end, it's I mean, we do have a mutual understanding, and the friendship goes beyond without saying. And but the process is that when we receive a manuscript, we of course we both read it through. We have a long conversation, what the poems were like, what the writing style is like, how much editing should be done, unless they already have done their own editing, which are pretty much people after my own heart. I do my own editing, and but it never hurts to have another pair of pure eyes. So that's our publishing process.
Okay. I want you to give me two things. I want you to give me your best experience as a poet, and I want you to give me your worst experience as a poet.
In what sense?
It could be maybe it was a bad reading, maybe it was a bad editor's letter, anything that would count as an experience to you.
I think my best experience would be all positive experiences, whether I feel accomplished about a poem I've written, and the tradition is if I do feel that decent about it, because as a writer, I'm my own worst critic. So if I do feel good about a piece, I'll right after I'm finished writing, I'll kiss the page and then close the book. And I have this folder saved in my email entitled Poetry Success, and that has pretty much every email I've received ever since my first poem was published, to whether I've won a certain type of poetry contest, whether I'm a featured reader somewhere, whether my book is coming out, just every little bit. In a way, I guess that's my journal, my ladder of success. I keep all of that in there. And sometimes I even keep a few rejection letters that I've received, so that I can learn from my mistakes and not make those in the future. My worst experience, it would probably have to be at a reading. You have to test out each crowd. You really do. And there were a couple moments, I'd say, when I'm first starting out as a spoken word poet. I've been a spoken word poet now for about close to 4 years now, and I've been a written word poet for more than a decade. And I'd like to say, spoken poetry is quite effective. It really is. But there are some poems that do read better, a lot better than they speak. Loosely quoting Ray Manzarek there. But it's true, and when I was first starting out, I was a nervous wreck. I would get up and I would start to read, and my voice was kind of shaky, and I would skip over maybe 2 or 3 stanzas and sit down and just put the dunce cone on my head. I had to learn to sort of feel out the crowd, own yourself. That's actually why I started wearing these sunglasses, was so that I could just block out everybody. All eyes were on me. And I hated that feeling at first, but now I still wear them because it's a part of the persona. Normally I would be wearing black during this interview, but it's Casual Friday at work, so I would dress in all black, whether it's black jeans and a black t-shirt or a black suit. And this hat, these sunglasses, and it's pretty much my persona. And I'm owning my persona. This has nothing to do with tuning people out anymore. You know, I can read just as well without them, but I prefer to leave them on. It's who I am when I'm at a reading, you know. Otherwise, you know, what was that line in the play The Elephant Man? This is myself, you know, so.
When you do a reading, is there a poem that you yourself like to read? Is there a poem that the crowd likes to hear?
With readings, there have seldom been requests. If there's a person I know and there's a poem that he or she would like to hear, then I perform it. Now, only twice have I gotten requests. And normally I don't do requests, unless of course I've been asked to do so. And there are some where, like, if I would go to multiple venues, I would travel to multiple venues, I would read a certain one just to test out every crowd to see if that's what they like. Now, however, I read these for myself. I'm not reading these for anyone. You know, that's kind of like the pressure of the music business. You know, if you're starting to be under the influence of the audience, the listeners, you know, sometimes it can be a positive experience for you, but other times there's just this balloon of pressure, and it's actually swelling. And if you don't let out some of the air, it's going to burst. And so I'm under no pressure whatsoever. That element is not, you know, doesn't enter within a close radius of me. So I don't really deal with that too much. But I read what feels right. Now, last night I was planning to read this protest poem that I wrote a while back, and it's never been read before in public, and I'd probably read it in Austin since it's the most liberal, and it's to prove a point. You know, one of my biggest pet peeves at poetry readings is people feel like that they have to use constant foul language to get their point across. And me, I see foul language in poetry like I see junk food. Use sparingly. Sometimes it can be effective here, and maybe here. Not here. You know, it's true what they say. You know, you keep cursing constantly, you know, you're going to start to look unintelligent. And that's all I see them as. I quickly lose interest when I hear poems like these, but yet a lot of the crowd seems to love it. But then again, I stand out rather than blend in. I've always been that way in many cases. So this piece, it actually had words that I have never used in my work and never will use again, but it's to prove a point. It's not to be one of these, pardon my language, jive turkeys that would use, you know, foul language to get their point across. Although people who would walk in while I'm reading this piece would see me that way and might walk out, you know. But this piece, it was just to prove a point. I was going to be a guinea pig, but then I noticed some of the audience in there, and I just decided, yeah, not the place or time. You know, you really have to feel that out. There's a phrase I identify myself with. I'm not going to censor myself to comfort your ignorance. But it just, at the time, it just didn't feel right. But next time I go to Austin, it's coming. So.
Let's define poetry. What is poetry to you?
Poetry to me is like love. It's unlimited. It's vast. I don't really think it has a definition. Now, you ask any of the graduate scholars here, I'm sure they would love to beat me to death with that answer. But it comes from your heart. It can contain structure, and it also can't. Doesn't have to necessarily. I believe it is metaphorically becoming naked, exposing your soul on paper with words. Words are your, the pen is your sword, the paper is your shield, the words are your armor, and you must wear them well. So,
Is poetry important?
is poetry important?
Yep.
Based on what I've been saying for the last 30 minutes, no, it's stupid. Yes, it's extremely important to me, and like I said before, I'd like to spread the word as much as I can. You know, for goodness sakes, even my screensaver at work on my computer, it says "Poetry Lives" and with a bunch of exclamation points, all capital letters, large capital letters. There are some things that you don't want to spread around with large capital letters, but a phrase like that, it's universal. Doesn't matter who you are, poetry does live. It's important to teach it to your children early on, sort of like arithmetic, words and numbers. But, poetry, important would definitely be an understatement in this matter.
You said we should teach poetry to our children. What can poetry teach us?
Well, I believe it can teach us to have a more open mind about certain factors of life, whether social justice issues, maybe more open to the supernatural, the paranormal, things that cannot be explained, more open to nature, more open to looking at life a different direction and not just one. When you read a child's book, I swear to goodness, the imagination of a child, there are no boundaries. It's one of the most beautiful things I've seen. So, and I saw this poem that this child had written that Carmen showed me, Carmen Jacobson, and she showed me. And this child wrote, I kid you not, the sun is a basketball. The black lines are the rays. And I'm just like, the kid sees a basketball as the sun, and I'm thinking that's unlimited right there. That's beautiful, and you cannot take that away from a child. If a child thinks that the basketball is the sun, let it be so. Poetry, it can teach us definitely a more open mind. You cannot take everything literally in poetry. You just can't. And, for example, there's this part of the title piece, the Green Eight. Green Eight would like to amount to something that is much greater than himself. He consumes success and defecates aftermath results. Life was a southern country until the mountains made him their permanent home. 'Tis a happy exile, a much-needed hiatus following the magic bouncing sphere as lyrics are read slowly. This is Hyacinth House come true. Poetry isn't about reading it once. It's about the experience. And it's about reading it 3 or 4 times. That's why I'm still reading the Epic of Gilgamesh. Sure, some of it does sound more direct, and with any epic poem, there is a story behind it. But, of course, with an earlier piece like Gilgamesh, there is somewhat of a pattern of symbolism, but you tend to see it a bit more. Whereas you look at poetry today, symbolism galore is mostly all you see. I believe that answers your question, and then some.
Okay. In one of my previous interviews, someone said that today there is a lack of feeling. Do you feel that people is there a lack of feeling in poetry? Is there a lack of feeling in general?
Cool. Yes. And I think the same thing goes for music and film. People actually acted back then. You have all these teenagers that are, selling #1 singles, #1 albums, going platinum. And, but you hear all these stories of singers back then who worked their butts off to make it to where they were. And granted, there are still some artists that do that nowadays. That's why I mostly listen to indie and underappreciated artists when it comes to modern music. Although, me being the old soul that I am, I prefer black and white movies, older music, as far as poetry goes. I explore. I give everything a chance. I don't knock anything until I try it, and that goes for all forms of media. But I'd say there, depending on the poet, depending on the work, I believe there are cases of lacks of feeling. But I have been to so many readings that I do spot somebody, and I'm so transfixed by it. I feel like I'm actually in the piece with them. They've sucked me into their whole universe. And I catch a glimpse of what it's like to be them, what it's like to be in their shoes. And let me tell you, it's a roller coaster of emotions. It really is. But for some, yes, I believe I have experienced a lack of feeling. And that's one of my great fears, that sometimes I don't see myself, so I can only guess by, the sort of vibrations I'm picking up, if there's even a lack of feeling in my work, So I'm always on the lookout for that. It's part of the reason why I actually record my readings. I like to hear myself. I like to see myself. What can I do better? So.
Why do you feel that there's negative emotions towards poetry?
People want action. People want visuals, People want hands-on, In a class, who wants to see a PowerPoint when they can really get down and, do the actual work, People want to go to concerts. They don't want to sit still, listen to people read. But I don't operate like that, obviously. I'm actually the kind of person, back then, back in T.S. Eliot's day and way before, there were dinner parties, and after dinner, they would gather into the study or into the living room, and they would hear the poet read. That was their entertainment, and I loved the hell out of that. I think that we should still do that. Whether it's one poet gathering with friends, hearing that person, or a group of poets having dinner together, and then after dinner, don't go out to a coffee shop. Don't go out to a crazy nightclub, or don't go to the films. Stay where you are. Share your work with others. Let them hear it. Expose yourself to them. And it's a great way to get naked and still have your clothes on.
It's no real secret that poetry is no longer in the mainstream market. Why do you think that poetry has an effect on the market? Do you think that major publishers, give me a second. There we go. It's no secret. Poetry's not in the mainstream market today. Do you feel larger publishers have an effect on how poetry is viewed on the public?
I'm sorry, here, do you want to do that too? Wait, were you combining these two questions?
Was I doing two questions?
It's no secret that part of the mainstream art, why do you think poetry's out of the limelight? And then you were asking me about publishers.
Oh.
We could do both of them. I can answer both of them if you want, or would you rather do?
It's no secret. Poetry's not in the limelight anymore. So why do you feel it's out of the limelight? And do you feel that large-scale publishers and large-scale bookstores like Barnes & Noble, have an effect on the public's view on poetry?
Very glad you asked me that, Weasel. And here are my answers to you. Nowadays, the words mainstream and corruption have become close brothers. And poetry is one of the oldest forms of art. Came way before the novel. And when the novel hit, poetry was still, riding alongside the novel. Short stories. And then now, poetry, we are happily placed in the corner of nearly any bookstore, or maybe in the middle in this, in this microscopic section. And normally I don't really speak too highly of what's currently in the mainstream, but as far as poetry, definitely like to get that back in there, and not in a bad way, because a lot of people see, what's in the now, what's in the mainstream, what's the latest, greatest, hip, new trend there is. It's not usually seen as a good thing. Just because something is popular doesn't mean that it's good. And in some ways, maybe it's a good thing that poetry is under the spotlight, because maybe if we were, maybe we'd be looking like fools. But I don't necessarily think that's true. I think it could be a revival. And that's what I think poetry is, really. A series of revivals, a series of rebirths, coming together. I actually had a conversation with the manager of the Barnes & Nobles in Webster, which is where you and I have read. And I asked him, just nicely, out of curiosity, why is the poetry in the back of the bookstore? Why couldn't we put some of the latest bestsellers, or a reissue of a book, the complete works of William Blake? Why can't we put that up front next to a New York, #1 bestseller novel? Why can't we do that? And he didn't really go into it. He's like, well, we're trying to put up front what would sell the most. And I'm like, how do you know that Blake wouldn't sell just as much as the new author? Blake is brilliant. Now, of course, according to whom, right? In the end, you like what you like. It's no wonder that freaking Apple Jacks commercial, made golden stars. But, as far as it being in the limelight, I mean, it can be a touchy subject, it really can. And that's why part of me feels like maybe we shouldn't be in the mainstream, because we might be looked down upon somewhat. But at the same time, you cannot care what somebody might think. But at the same time, it's a rebirth. If we went back into the mainstream, I think that would be a huge benefit for us personally. Now with publishers, as far as I know, there are 3 different types of publishers: the larger corporations, the self-publishing process, and in the middle, independent publishing. Let's talk about the minuscule, the self-publishing process. It's a brilliant process. You do everything by yourself. You are your own literary agent. You are your own publisher. You are the author. You are the editor. You are everything. The self-publishing process, though, depending on what you use, you usually wind up losing more than you make, unless you have connections, unless you become a big hit. You're taking that risk, and you should allow yourself to take that risk. You should know what you're going into. Now, the larger corporations, unless they know you're going to make them a lot of money, they're going to block you out. They're not going to treat you like a human being. And that's a sad fact. I've known a couple people, trying to get into that area, and they wouldn't even accept them, and from what I remember, actually, and they said, well, it's poetry, even though we're, a huge bookseller, we just can't take this, at this time, and we all know what that means. Independent publishing, however, loving it. It's just as great as independent music, It's underrated, it's underappreciated, but those people will actually treat you like a human being. It's usually one person or 2 people at it. Both you and I are in the independent publishing market, and the press will work with you. They will help spread the word for your book, and but they will leave you to be your own marketer. They spread the word, but it's up to you in the end to really market yourself. And that goes with any form of media, whether it's the latest album, latest short film you've made, latest painting, look around. I'm sure that these pieces of art weren't in the school right away. There was a large process, so a little morsel of advice for you future poets out there, or even novelists, or any other type of author: go into independent publishing process. You will not regret this, I promise you.
Would you tell a fresh face to publishing? Would you tell them to go into independent press before going into self-publishing?
That part is up to them. I'll give them the pieces of advice. I would show them what I've been through and what I've seen other people go through. I can even help them make a pros and cons chart. In the end, it's really up to them. I can't convince anybody you should do self-publishing, or you should go into the indie publishing process. But personally, I would choose the latter.
Okay. The internet has made a lot of things easier. We can get Wi-Fi wherever. Even in this building, we have Wi-Fi. Is internet beneficial for poets? I mean, you can get a blog anywhere. It's practically free. As long as you have a laptop, Kindle Fire, iPad, something that your fingers can maneuver, you got it. Do you feel that all of this technology, this internet, iPads, all of that, do you feel it's beneficial for poetry, or is it hurtful?
I think it's both. I think it's a huge mixture of both. On one hand, it can be beneficial. It's a great way to get your work out there, to get your words out there, to say what you need to say about your poetry news in general, and others, especially Twitter. I'm really fond of Twitter now. And I've been using that lately to promote my book, and at first, I admit, I thought hashtags were the dumbest thing in the world. I thought it was a dumb word. But learning more about it and putting away my ignorance, you can tag yourself along with major groups, whether it's poetry, a page, or YouTube in general. I posted this YouTube video, my YouTube channel, and the YouTube company actually favorited my channel, and it meant a lot to me. So I think it's beneficial in that area. Now, it's also hurtful because with any other subject on the internet, you can say anything you want, and once you post it up there, it's up there. Even if you delete the page, it can still be seen by some. And choose your words carefully. Seriously, choose your words carefully. Because with any form of media, there could be prone to gossip, and that's never good. It's really not. Some people wouldn't speak too highly, about poetry, and they can use Amazon to put a phony review of a book, and could make you look, incredibly awful as a poet, as a person, even. Try to differentiate the two, though. Yeah.
Poetry has had some historical moments. There's lots of poets that went out there in the past. They went out to protest rallies. They actually challenged things. Are poets asleep today? Are there any protest poets that are really going out there and actually being active and challenging hot button topics, or are we asleep?
Sleep? I'm sorry. What'd you say? There is some truth to every joke. So somewhat. It depends on the issue that they are supporting. Me, as far as politics are concerned, I consider myself apolitical. Because all my life I've been told, pick a side, or you should pick this side, you should pick this side. So I said calmly, but sincerely, leave me the hell alone. You pick the sides. I focus mostly on social justice issues, the ones that not a whole lot of people pay attention to, where a certain issue has a cult following. For me, I'm a full supporter of animal rights, definitely feminism, and but nothing radical. I don't support anything radical. If you want to get your point across, definitely do so. Don't go burning down buildings, because that's what's going to make you look like monsters, you know. Seriously, and the same thing goes for poetry. I'm a poetry activist. I really am. And I'll act in nearly any means necessary. But you don't want to exploit yourself in the negative manner, because, you know, there goes your one shot, you know. So I think it really depends on the person, on the poet, on what they're trying to get across. Oh, I also support anti-racism fully. We only have biological differences, you know, to hell with xenophobia, you know. There is no color, there is no race, there's just one species, you know. We're all culturally different, sure, but, you know, there is no different. And unfortunately, you know, Texas, you know, some certain areas, you know, whereas the rest of the world, you know, not really the most liberal. There's a lot of closed-minded, you know, still a lot of, you know, ghosts, if you know what I mean, you know. And it's sick. It is really sick. Then again, I was raised, you know, near Chicago, one of the most liberal areas I've ever been in. The only thing that they're not too crazy about is guns, so, you know, be prepared to karate chop those muggers. You know, I definitely take these issues seriously, and I've written about all of these in my work. You know, feminism, animal rights, you know, poetry, anti-racism, and but the thing that's awful is that, you know, since I'm not in Austin, I don't get to read a whole lot of those in Houston. You know, it's definitely one of the more conservative areas of Texas, and Texas is a conservative state. Not trying to diss it or anything, it's just the sad fact. Whoops. There you go.
At one time, poets were considered prophets because of their activism. Are there prophets today?
Oh, you better believe it. I'm making quite a profit. No, sorry. No, yes, definitely some of them. At this local coffee shop that is unfortunately burned to the ground, we were all sort of family. You may be familiar with Taft Street Coffee. Well, it was near Allen Parkway, towards downtown Houston, towards the artsy part of downtown Houston, which is where I prefer to hang out. Not Midtown or, you know, the posh part of town or the Wall Street areas. Definitely the artsy parts, you know, River Oaks, Rice Village, Montrose, you know, those areas. But there's this place called Taft Street Coffee, and we were all sort of family there. We would all gather. We were a bunch of misfits, and still keep in contact with these people. But a couple of them, one of them whose name is David Lejeune, and who I'm good friends with, he's something else. He always has the most wild stories. He met Ginsberg, and there was this tradition that Ginsberg spoke of where you kiss your favorite poet, and Ginsberg wanted to kiss Whitman, so David Lejeune went up and kissed Ginsberg, and he met him. He went to all these concerts, you know, The Doors, Joplin, the Grateful Dead, mostly anybody you could think of back then. But his work it's just unparalleled. It's mystical. It's mythical. There's one too many visions in there, and I think he is definitely one of the modern prophets of today in poetry. And he's just, you know, his work, I have to read it over and over again. I have to ask him to perform it over and over. I'm just spellbound. You know, it's incredible what he's done. It really is.
There's an article that states you can tell a medium by posing this question: can it change anything? Can poetry change anything? Does it have that power today?
Nah, just words in a book, whatever. Oh, yes. Yes, they can change. Light My Fire, great example. Good God, you know how many people were influenced, you know, houses burned down, you know. After Clockwork Orange came out, several reports of people dressing up like Alex DeLarge and the Droogs and committing the same sort of crimes, you know, rapes and, you know, beating the homeless. And, you know, that's why Stanley Kubrick had all these death wishes coming to him. It can change, but those were negative examples, but I think it can also change positive ways too. This anti-racist piece that I wrote, there were two parts of it. One of them was put in another book, and that it was quite long. The other one was put in another book, part 2. It was shorter, and that was actually dedicated to Mr. Rodney King, who had passed. And the poems are called Colorblind, which is what I hope we all are. I'd like to think so. And you really have to stand behind your guns. That's the sort of piece where you can't just read it. You have to put oomph into it. Now, you don't necessarily have to make it a slam piece, you know, but you have to put expression into that. And that's exactly what I did with that. And a couple of people came up to me and said, you know, finally, you know, somebody who agrees, you know. I didn't think there was any of these people anymore. I'm like, oh, I didn't either, you know. And it was really sad to hear that. There should be more people saying this, you know, and we should all come together. You know, we should all amalgamate and, you know, and spread this message of awareness, you know.
I'm a new poet. I'm a fresh face. Can you tell me ways of getting my work out there?
First of all, no, you're not. You're doing quite well for yourself. But if you were a fresh
imagine me as a fresh poet.
Okay, if you were a fresh face. Well, first of all, what would you like to know as a fresh face? What area? How do you want to get started?
What are the best ways to get my work showcased? Do I do more readings? Should I self-publish a chapbook? What are some ways to make connections? What are some ways to, you know, start dropping my name in the pile?
You want to make a good name for yourself, then do what I did. For the longest time, I was against publishing any work. I had this mindset. As my worst critic, I said, "Who's gonna like this, really?" And I'm not gonna lie. There are times when I still feel like that, but you know. As a writer, you're your own worst critic, and you have to learn how to get past that somewhat. Not all the way, because, you know, if you become completely confident, you're going to become lost in it, and you're going to become the cockiest person on earth. And, so for a while, I was against publishing. I really was, but then, little by little, I started, you know, getting out there. Submit to multiple magazines and journals, go to more readings, definitely attend more readings, perform, listen, definitely listen, and you can also self-publish, that's also enough. I didn't go that route. When it comes to posting my unpublished work, extremely paranoid. I'm like an overprotective wolf, whether I think the work is great or not. You know, that's why when I post individual poems on my fan page, I only post ones that have been published. There are a few videos on my YouTube channel where they're not published, but nobody could really copy them because it's way too personal. Nobody would get that. You can't really change that around. And I pity the fool who tries to steal that. So.
Okay. Do you have any other advice for fresh poets?
Yes. Use my motto. Poetry lives. Save everything. I've heard countless people telling me, "Oh, I've incinerated these drafts. I've thrown them away." Don't. It's an evolution. If you want to look at yourself, there are two different ways you can look at yourself as far as poetry is concerned. There is a rising prism, a rising monolith. or it's a downward spiral. It's whatever you choose. You make your own destiny, I believe. And save every single draft, because it's going to be progression. You look at that draft, you're going to say, good God, what can I do to improve upon that? And then you're going to write even more. So save every draft. Drag people, your friends, family, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatnot, to readings, and expose them to that, because in a way it's going to be like pay it forward. They might be spellbound, and they might even tell their friends, and those friends will. It's a chain reaction, hoping to be exploding in the right direction. And definitely, if you have a gift like writing poetry, let nothing stop you. Whenever I marry my wife to be, we still have to, there are two things. There's teamwork in marriage. We are one, but we also have to remain the person who we were before we met each other. And that's very important in any marriage or any relationship, is to, enjoy each other, but also enjoy yourself as well. Let nothing stop you. Even when you have kids, there are going to be times when you won't be able to write as much, but find the time. Don't, people say, oh gosh, I'm so busy. Here's what I'm doing. I'm working full time. I'm taking classes at night. I'm actually writing monthly articles for this national women's magazine. I'm pretty much their male Dear Abby, because women are sending me their relationship and love and dating questions to me, and more than happy to answer them. I'm doing that for them. I'm trying to make a difference in that area. I guess you could see me as the modern Cupid, modern Hitch, Dear Abby, whatever you want to call it. I'm working out as much as I can. Fitness is extremely important to me, as much as poetry, but I still find time to write, because I know that if I let that go for too long, like fitness, you're just going to be sitting and sluggish. You're going to feel useless. Now, if you have writer's block, that's another story, and that's really unfortunate. The good news is, the longer your writer's block is, once you get over it, there's going to be a tidal wave of ideas, and you're going to need your voice recorder then to get all those ideas down. Trust me, because sometimes the mind moves faster than the pen can write. Believe me, I know. But I didn't let that get the best of me. I recorded everything on the voice recorder. So that would be my advice to you, Mr. Freshface, and all the youngins out there.
Well, Mr. Wise, this has been a great interview. I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with me. Anything else you want to say before we head off?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say what an honor it is to be a part of this documentary, and it really means a lot. For the longest time I've been saying, poetry lives, poetry lives. I've been going around, and the word has been spread somewhat. And a lot of people I know have been using that, which brings such joy to my heart. And I'd like to thank you for making me a part of that, and for also telling me what the influence behind this documentary was. and I know that this is going to definitely spark interest in a lot of people, and I'm going to do whatever it takes on my part to help spread the word of this documentary as well. Just give me the tools, and I will set it out there. And the other thing, what am I forgetting? There was one other thing. Oh, right, yes. Poetry lives.